Good morning. We're going to call our meeting to order. Thank you all for joining us on this beautiful September day. We are a small but mighty group today, which is just as well, as we have many important sort of ongoing work tasks to work through. So I think we'll start with some introductions, and I would love to start with the folks who are on the phone. Is there anyone joining us by phone this morning?
This is Serena. I'm on the phone.
Good morning, Serena.
Good morning, Serena.
Good morning.
Is there anyone else on the phone with us? Great. Why don't we go ahead and do introductions, and today, because we're small, we can include everyone for introductions. But Dr. Henry, would you start us off?
Samuel Henry.
Peter Tromba.
Nicole Maher.
Janet Doherty Smith.
Seth Allen.
Dave Porter.
Sarita Maya.
Great. And Sarita, do you want to introduce yourself and your role as you're relatively new?
Sure. This is my first month working with the Early Learning Division as the Early Learning Equity Specialist.
Wonderful. Welcome. We're so glad to have you and so glad you're here with us today. Good. So today we have some important tasks. We are going to do an update and discussion about our overall policy work regarding the overrepresentation of students of color in special education, kind of framing out our work and our next steps. We will do the same for our policy work around partnerships with culturally specific community groups. And then we will spend the bulk of our meeting with our continued analysis of the equity lens as it pertains to our investment recommendations. We made good progress in our joint meeting with the Outcomes and Investment Committee, but we didn't get as far as we would like, and we have lots of perspective we'd like to give to the remainder of the topics that we didn't get to. And then we'll do a run through of what we expect to see and do with our high school equivalency recommendation that will be at our next OEIB meeting. And then our last objective will be to invite folks for public testimony. Any questions, suggestions, or additions folks might like to add to this agenda or propose for next agendas? Then we will go ahead and move on to agenda item number 2, which we'll invite Peter to lead us through a discussion and an update and conversation.
So, actually, I have to agenda item, which is next meeting. I don't know if we've decided on our October meeting, but I won't be here. And I think you're not here.
Yeah, I think we should cancel
Okay.
it. People have been working hard. Give them a break.
No October meeting?
Well, I can't be here, and I think...
No, I'm
Okay.
not pushing back. I'm just...
Sam
Right.
wants a meeting.
Yeah.
Sam wants a
Okay.
meeting.
No.
And then maybe a real concerted effort on getting everyone here in November.
Well, yeah, and I think that would be great. I think there's so much work to be done
Yep.
between now and,
It'd be good.
I mean, and hopefully we'll be so happy about our success of high school equivalency we can take
Right.
a break.
So first topic is overrepresentation of students of color in special education. And if you'll recall at our last meeting, we actually had a really vibrant discussion here on a number of topics relating to overrepresentation in special ed and a request for more research. And there was some particular research that was suggested. One was looking at each of the different and this is different, I think, than what was presented by ODE staff on the first of the meeting that I didn't attend. But by disability type, an analysis of, and also by grade, an analysis of, disaggregated by race, how does the identification go in Oregon? Nationally, I know some of that research, and we probably have it for Oregon, but where it's turning out to be a little bit harder to get than we thought it would be. Generally, there's overrepresentation in particular categories for some particular racial groups. So nationally, it might be more common to see a Native American student as a behaviorally, like an ED designation, or an African American student, especially males, as a learning disabled. But as one of our, I can't remember who said it, but it might have been Ramon in our last meeting. There was someone in the discussion. Some that are just based on a medical diagnosis, where it's more cut and dry, you see much less. And there is national evidence of that. Again, we're looking at that in Oregon. So that's one area of research that we're following up on in collaboration with Oregon Department of Ed. Another thing came up in the meeting was focus groups. And I think just looking at my notes, the intent was to really engage with parents and students to ask, not just from the data perspective, but from a qualitative perspective, what's people's impression of the experience. And so we are, I don't know if I mentioned this or if you folks know it, but the OEIB now has a research staff. There's 3 of them. Shandine Garcia, who you all have met, and also Cheng Fei Lai and Chrissy, whose name I'm blanking on last name. I'm sorry, Chrissy, if you're listening, it'll come to me in a second. Hewitt, and Chrissy Hewitt, and they have been given the task of doing a lot of research for the OEIB, and this is in addition to it, which is construction of focus groups, because they turn out to be pretty tricky if you want to get good qualitative information that's not biased. The setup of them takes time. So I'm happy about a little bit of a delay till November, because it will allow us to get some draft of literature review, Oregon data, and at least the design for the focus groups. I'm not sure if we'll have had them by then, or at least a good idea of design. So when we get a little bit further, Nicole, do you have a question?
Oh, I just had a question and a suggestion for a third research area, and I want to be conscientious because I'm sure we could add like a gajillion additional areas to research, but I think it would be very important and very powerful to see the early intervention data statewide. I have seen it for the metro region, and the overwhelming trend that you see is that because kids of color are underrepresented in the early learning places like Head Start, so on and so forth, they're under-referred for services for small and minor issues. And then even when you look at the data about who gets referred, their lack of participation because of the lack of culturally responsive outreach and engagement with the parents. So like for populations, you might see, they're based on the population, there should be this many African American kids just referred in general, and they're under-referred. And then based on the number who were referred, a tiny percentage actually go for the assessment, and then a tinier percentage actually go for the services. And then, fast forward 2 years later, and they show up to the kindergarten, and something that could have been a very minor issue, a small speech delay, a pronunciation issue turns into a different issue, and the next thing you know, they're labeled for communication disorder for the rest of their educational experience. And I just think that a lot of the sort of lack of access to quality childcare, early learning, creates some of these issues, and I would hope that we would just spend the time to look at the root cause.
Absolutely.
Could I tag on to our chair's point there? In a previous life, I was involved with school desegregation, and we worked with a particular city school district where African Americans and Native Americans had been overrepresented in the assignment to mentally retarded, and where Latinos were overrepresented in assignment to emotionally disturbed. And in fact, that school district ended up having a court master and going through a whole series of training protocols. What that revealed was how vulnerable the whole community is, which leads to the point that I'm making. We know that parents are an integral part of this, but whole communities, and I'm looking at my colleague, when you approach a community and say we are looking at something, and many communities see this as a whole community issue. I know that members of the Native American community do, members of the African American community, and the Latino communities do. Also members of Asian American communities do. My point is that in our design, it seems really important to me that this is a part of what we consider when we're doing some qualitative work. If we just hone in on parents, we don't capture some of the real meaning that goes on there. And we also then just capture those who are actually in school at this time. and we don't get to a lot of the qualitative data of people who have recently gone through a whole series of these pieces there. So this is not either a blaming or a way to expand it beyond what we need to look at, but it becomes really important to get some of that kind of good data. And I'm sure our researchers will think of that.
A resource I would share is a lady by the name of Roberta Weber who oversees special ed for the metro region, and about 4 years ago she did almost the exact data distilling that you talked about. She did it for the metro region, and she also included things like underrepresentation of talented and gifted. And we had some populations who were a 0% talented and gifted, which is, we have tens of thousands of kids in certain ethnic groups, and to have that percentage come forward was quite shocking. So there may be some
Sure.
some
natural
tools that
Claire
she
Popel
used that you could
is
just
doing a current look at underrepresentation of, I think it's primarily African Americans, but
Who's that again, I'm sorry?
Claire Popel, P-O-P-L-E. She's a doctoral student at PSU, and I just happen to know that because I'm on her committee. But she's focusing in on the underrepresentation of African Americans in gifted and talented programs, and in gifted and talented, the whole.
Nicole, one of the things, now this is back several years when I was working, but there were different race and ethnic categories for early intervention, early childhood special education than there were for K-12. And for birth to 5, there was not the option of saying not specified. So I used to...
So was that like a general kind
There are
of catch-all?
You just had to put, I cannot remember, I think it was Pacific Islanders, African American, Native American, not 4 categories, but there was not a non-specified. So when we would compare our EI data with the school districts, they had a percentage that were not specified. So then, I think, I wouldn't swear to this, but I think, I used to call it like photo ID, that if it wasn't specified somewhere, somebody would just look at the child, because we had to put something down. And it is, you don't want to press parent. I mean, it's just, there's many ways that I think that the data collection and follow-up. Another thing that was different in birth to 5, I believe, is that many more children from Multnomah County were put in child protective services. A number of African American children would be placed in Clackamas County, which is a very relatively white county. They would be living with white families. Now, this is my theory and a little experience, that generally by the time the kids were 5 or school age, they would either have been returned to their homes or to adoptive families. And so the percentage of children who were African American in birth to 5, but living with Caucasian families, was different than the percentage of children who were living with African American parents.
I totally get what you're saying.
And I am certainly not saying there is not bias and mistaken things, but there are a lot of other factors that complicate trying to follow the data, in my experience. So I would just say, when you're looking at that, I would really look at that. So.
That's a great suggestion.
And I have to say, by starting the research on it, I think folks have identified that there's a ton of research going on currently about this, and it's very complex, as you've referred to, and Nicole too. At kindergarten, we do this assessment that's a measure of 5 years of things. It's this very rough, very blunt instrument that we're sorting kids with, and there's such complex stories.
Yeah. I'm just doing an opinion now. I think one challenge you will face, and one thing that I have experienced having worked within the school districts, with 7 school districts and a lot in Beaverton as well, and being part of hundreds of IEP meetings and having staff members who were part of hundreds of IEP meetings, and then interacting with folks at the state level and folks who are in leadership roles around special ed, the perspective about how special ed and IEP meetings and what folks think is happening as compared to what actually happens on a day-to-day level it is two alternate realities in my experience. And even just, my son was, we were told he has to be on an IEP before he started kindergarten, which, that's an interesting situation in itself. And then about 19 illegal things happened in his IEP meeting, and very nice, good people. And so, I think there's like the broad picture, and then there's the like individual experience. And I just think when I hear folks from DOE and other folks talk about how it works and what the system is and what the process is and then what it's like for day-to-day and just basic compliance stuff, I think we have really different things
Completely
happening.
agree. My son had an IEP, and I was a special education administrator. So, I didn't blast that out, but you would think.
Right.
And they had everything written out, and it was all done before I got there.
Oh, yeah.
But then, when you go from this chair to the parent chair, I didn't want to cause a problem or get my kid a worse black eye because of, because his mother was being difficult. So, but then on the other side of it, there's so much that has to be done, so many pieces of paper and stuff, and I know on that experience that people are rushing it through so that the meeting doesn't go more than 2 hours. So there's just so many conflicting things. I think it's really hard.
Great. Any other last comments on
Well,
that before
I guess it would be helpful to know the will of the committee in terms of end product of this work. If it's a policy recommendation similar to what we did with the high school equivalency or the GED, in that one we're giving recommendations to agencies to do things. We were looking to maybe do some investments somewhere, just that kind of thing. Because this could be obviously a dissertation, even just a teeny piece of it, and the result of that might be something very, very small. So I'm wondering, when you folks vision your best hope about what would come from this committee work ultimately, what are some of your thoughts?
I think if the data does compel us to believe that there's a problem, I think that a starting place is to acknowledge and name the problem, because I think that there are strong emotions and feelings and perspectives from communities that there's a very serious problem. And we have districts across the state that are, the feds are saying you're out of compliance.
Yeah.
So that is happening. That's not a rumor. But then statewide, it's not really acknowledged from OEIB or Department of Ed that we have a problem. It's not even really discussed, or I'm not aware that it's on the forefront of anyone's mind. So I think depending on what the research shows us and where we land, if there's a problem, we need to name that there's a problem. I then think that there's a need for us to be clear about our values and our worldview on this issue. If children are being over-identified based on their race and ethnicity, or under-identified, which happens in some communities, I think we need to be clear about our values and our worldview and our beliefs about remedying that. And then I think there's an opportunity to make some suggestions.
I want to agree with Nicole. I think the first thing is to really see what the data show, what the nature of problem, if there is, and I think that's the first thing we need from the research team. I think then we need to have an interaction with the research team about what the data has shown, to talk about some of the next steps. There may be some real clear ones that come out that say, you need to do something here about this. But I think there are going to be a few of those, but I think more likely, as Nicole has suggested, there's a need to call attention to this vast area that something is going on in. And to also say, what is the impact on our educational system of the way we've done business so far?
Right.
Great.
And particularly tying it into the fact that we know students who are on IEPs, their graduation
Yeah,
Rate is
we already
much
know
lower.
that.
is much
Yep.
lower
Yep.
than any actual ethnic
Graduation
subgroup.
rate is lower, the college attendance rate is lower.
Yeah, all of 40/40/20
Yeah.
is lower.
Did you-
Janet, did you have best hopes for this process?
Well, I agree with what's been said. I would just, again, like we talked about last time, comparing the categories of children with more severe
Yep.
or physical disabilities and the percentages by race, ethnicity, whatever, compared to
Yep.
the ones that are emotionally disturbed, learning disabled, that are a little bit softer and easier maybe
Right.
to extend the, or then, no, you know, I haven't thought of too much, but like autism spectrum disorder, it would be interesting to know what the representation is.
More affluent white nationwide.
But, yeah, well, I know. I never saw kids in Head Start particularly that were there. They probably just didn't get referred.
Well,
I
yeah.
mean, I just,
Yep.
I would just think that would
Okay.
be interesting.
Well,
And then what I would opt for is that across the board, that those numbers represented the population.
Madam Chair. So Peter, what's a timeline here that we might, and obviously we may need to check in as things are going on, but, where you and your research team might be at least getting back to us on a,
Well, I envision November meeting that we are bringing forward an initial literature review on the categories here and maybe some other that have come up. And what I heard you mention, Dr. Henry, is a dialogue with the research team, so I think we'd have them all here. We've got one of our researchers who was recently at University of Oregon researching very intricate levels of granular levels of special ed and evaluation. And then we have another whose expertise is a little bit more on program evaluation. I think they have different perspectives, and then Shandine brings a third. So I think the November meeting, because I think then we're done a lot of this outcome stuff, and we can really take a good look at that. One thing I just want to say is what struck me is one of our tasks at the OEIB Research and Policy Group is supposed to be to bring together researchers from around the state to be a convener. And I've heard in both meetings names flying out that are already working on some of these things. So an initial thought, and I don't know if we could do it by then, but it seems to me even a larger group with more perspectives and more existing work that's Oregon specific would be at least helpful for our team, some kind of convening of researchers around that topic and leveraging stuff that's already going on. But it's possible that by November, we might find a few of those and have it be, a rich discussion. I don't know whether or not I think the data also will be ready by November, at least the first cut on the data. So by disability, by handicapping condition or disability type, by race, by grade. So I think those two things, looking at the data and then having the team there to take that next step in terms of maybe the qualitative part. I'm really intrigued by and very ignorant of a design that would have this community focus. And I think it's really intriguing. I would like to do more research on it. So I think that's something to bring in as well. I've read a lot about parent interviews and student focus groups and teacher focus groups, and when I heard you talk about communities, I also heard culturally specific communities, at least as being one of the organizers, which we have a number of examples of groups who are already working with this committee. So it'll be the primary piece of the November agenda, and I guess it's how far we get. And I think we have to put some boundaries around it, because if we keep asking, we're not going to be answering too many. So
Yeah.
does that sound good?
I want to throw one more name.
Okay.
away, and it's Ann Fullerton, Fullerton. And she's I want to say, Associate Dean for Research in the Graduate School of Education at Portland State. Her background, and she's former chair of special ed department there. And she would most likely be a good point person for contact with a whole slew of people who are doing research
Great.
in the area, and herself. She's one of the founders of the Kiwanis Camp. And a very respected researcher and somebody who's been working in this area and in this topic for
Great.
A good while. So.
And I'm just unaware, and maybe Janet, you know, has there ever been an Oregon-specific, I know there's special ed conferences all the time, and they're usually focused on law. Has there been one, a major state one, about this topic?
Not including the community.
It might be really powerful to convene something like that.
That could be.
In terms of getting, if part of our goal is getting information out there, bringing together people from across the state who are working on this to meet, a lot could come of it. Okay.
There's precedent in that, Peter. When we were developing and getting ready to present the next generation science standards, essentially we being ODE at that point, but some of the members of the state board, and convene these groups of people across the state who had an interest in science education and interest and background. I mean, and that also was the support for changing the science standards. We had, I think, 135 different groups that eventually supported the changing of the policy around science standards. And obviously, we are trying to be both transparent and efficient. And that might be just a model for getting at where we need to be.
And did you involve kind of communities in that process?
Yes, we did.
Awesome. And they showed
Yes,
up?
we did. They showed up.
Good.
I was most impressed with a group of the early learning people in terms of the science standards. But they really showed up.
Cool. That's very cool.
And we wouldn't be able to convene anything like that, but we might be able to have an initial plan for it at that November meeting, what would it look
Yeah,
like, and who
yeah.
might our invitation list, what date might we, okay.
Yeah. And we wouldn't expect you to plan and have it before November. If you can do
Peter,
it.
I don't know.
Yeah. Are we not being
Well, it's-
aspirational
I don't know,
enough?
Peter.
Just kidding.
You know, it's an emergency, it's seeing it every day. Okay?
Great. And then number 3, and just to be clear on number 3, this one's really about our policy on just partnerships with not just culturally specific groups, but also parents and community It's kind of like how our spirit of partnership in general, or is this more today just focused on the culturally specific?
Well, I like the board's direction on it. Where this came from originally was when there was a reading equity summit that OEIB convened with early learning and K-12 to work on the third grade reading plans. And it really helped shape the third grade reading plans from one thing to something that's richer. And during that meeting, that's where Ann Curry-Stevens from Portland State presented some not yet published research regarding the differences between a mainstream organization that tries to be culturally responsive versus a culturally specific organization, sort of compare and contrast. And not that either is, well, yeah, one is better than the other in many ways, but the key issue is recognizing where, as an educational system, we have to be more intelligent or strategic about how we involve and where we place power or money in whose hands, and it was very compelling work. And right after that, we had thought, boy, we need Ann to come to this group and just, so that's what that is.
Oh, okay. I'm
And-
sorry, Peter, then I'm...
It's
I was
okay.
thinking-
So we're going to schedule Ann?
That's what the plan
Oh,
would
that'd
be.
great. That'd be
Okay.
great.
So are you sort of suggesting that, so we've kind of put on our to-do list sort of a policy and worldview about how we partner and engage, and it sounds like you're saying, let's hear Ann and drill down and maybe narrow our policy recommendation. Like even, I mean, OEIB and ODE and all of us, we actually need to adopt an official definition of culturally specific so that it's not,
Right.
that's a very important task, and if you don't do it, suddenly lots of interesting,
You don't know what the landscape is.
Yes. So are you sort of suggesting that we invite Ann and then maybe drill down on a more focused policy piece around culturally specific, which I mean, that sounds even more doable than what we had talked about. I think we should do the other as well.
And maybe this sets the groundwork.
Yeah.
You start with this,
Yeah.
and then maybe take a back in terms of just partnerships. But
Okay.
I was just so intrigued by
Yeah.
the work, and it was new as a public school educator for me, how much research had been done on this question. And completely, if I were back in a district today, I'd be completely different in the way I went about working with my community as a result of that hour. So I figured raising that up and then maybe focusing
That sounds great.
on some definitions would be helpful, because I throw around the words culturally specific now all the time, and I have one meaning for it. I'm not
Sure.
sure it's the same.
Sure. Great. That sounds like a great next step.
So I don't know in terms of timing if it would be good for November to also have that, or if maybe November is focused mostly on special ed. Do we have 2 hours if we do both, or?
My suggestion would be to do the focus on special ed in November, but to already line up.
For December.
Maybe Ann and some of the others coming on December
Okay.
to help us
That sounds
chunk
great.
that out.
That sounds great.
Great, that gives plenty of time for us to coordinate schedules and.
Nicole, how's that sound to you? in
That
terms
sounds,
of-
I totally agree, yeah. And then, is there anyone on the phone that has joined us or has comment about our discussion today? I want to take a moment to... Okay. Radio silence. They must agree with everything we're saying. That sounds like a good plan. Does that feel good for you? or-
I do have it. I've been thinking about this, and I don't know if I can articulate what I'm thinking, but, we see the Common Core standards and the more higher standards, more demanding things. And now I guess I'm saying, whose standards are those? And you talk about culturally different culture, like, I think you once said Native Americans tend to talk to their children less or in different ways. So, are we saying then that you need to talk more to your kids, or do we need to, I guess, are we all going to what are we getting them ready for? How do we preserve what is a culture, and what are our values? You're preparing teachers. Where are we going with that? How can we be respectful of everybody, and yet we're putting teachers in the position of, you might be paid by how your children do on these tests, which may not be fair.
I just have 2 quick points, because this is obviously
Big.
something we can get into.
Yeah.
We try to prepare teachers, and remember, we're a graduate teacher education program, because we want already to have reached the threshold of preparation. We try to prepare teachers for a pluralistic society, which has some different components to it, including a very conscious social justice piece there. But also with knowledge about some of the various groups and a willingness to explore others. So that's one piece. On the Common Core piece, the Common Core for me is the floor, not the ceiling. And we've never aimed for the floor. We've been below ground in terms of what we've done with respect to where we aim for. And so this conversation about the Common Core and the assessment of the Common Core, which reveals that we haven't done what we need for the floor, I'm hoping is where we stand, and then say we're going to do more than this. That what we strive for is all Oregonians who can aspire to these employment and financial stability kinds of pieces, because they have all of this going with them, and the schools are a major part of helping that happen in conjunction with communities and parents. I'm not sure how that gets aired. I know, in fact, a lot of it in some states have gone back on Common Core. They've accused it of being a federal conspiracy. When it wasn't, it was launched, in fact, by the National Governors Association, because each of the governors said, we want something going on in their state. So I think there's a constant need both for information about what's going on, and also to hear, and maybe at some point we'll ask some of the Oregon University system components to talk about where this pluralism fits with respect to the teacher preparation. I think that might be a good conversation. They talk to each other, but they don't as often talk to, you know, the wider audience here, and that's been one of my criticisms to my colleagues. And so that everybody understands what it is we're going about. I mean, when I sit down with my colleagues at U of O, for example, there are all these common threads and common research pieces and this even a common language about talking about equity and equity for teacher education. And it might be a real important place for this committee to both invite that wider conversation and to make that wider conversation one that becomes a vehicle for us to do some other kind of policy.
If I can interject, so much at OEIB, we are K-12 in the things that we talk about. And this opportunity to have any role with this committee working with teacher prep, professors, and this idea of common language, I think would just be a great role for the committee, because we're supposed to look at the whole system. And sometimes we end up looking at just a piece of it. So.
Well, and you go from, I know in early intervention, early childhood special education preparation at Portland State. Good program, well done, and then the students go into the reality of my workplace in the past, and it's, you know, it's taking the idealistic and the what's the top work, and then into the reality of, and I just, you know, now I have more time to think and I have fewer answers. So.
Thank you for reminding us of that question that I grapple with daily. Anything else, Peter, that we need to do on 2 and 3 before
No,
we...
I think we have a plan. So it's actually the next 2 months planned out. So I'm very, very happy about that.
I just want to make sure we're giving enough time for 4 and 5. Would it be helpful if we actually did the high school equivalency recommendation discussion before we do the other one?
You bet.
Just because I would hate for us to run out of time. And
Yep.
Is that okay with everybody?
Absolutely.
If we switch those two?
So in your packet is the now renamed, and I assume Shandine mentioned this when she presented to the combined group, but it's now high school equivalency. And one thing I just want to note is that we have actually done the research. Chrissy Hewitt in our office has done the research on the equivalent tests out there besides GED. It's interesting, and we will be able to present some of that to the committee at some points on our recommendation to explore it. But the big thing to know about this for folks involved in this process is kids are getting these alternative equivalency tests in other states already and on their way to Oregon to enroll in schools and things. So we have to get in front of it. It's already being administered in California. So I just want to note that. So this policy recommendation is designed to go before the board at our next meeting. The way that board meetings are structured since Lindsay started, Lindsay Capps is our chief of staff, is that there's more time for reports from committees. So if there's an agenda item like the high school equivalency, it's now in the equity and partnerships report. So the way it's listed is Nicole and then Shandine are actually...
And do you have the time yet that will be? Because I'm trying to recruit people who really want to come, and I still don't know the time.
Seth is somewhere in the building. He'd be the one I would go to because he's got the most recent... Seth, I don't know, can we estimate when during the board meeting the high school equivalency presentation, which is part of Nicole's, will be? Do we have a rough idea?
We have a rough working agenda right now. I can get that information to you right now.
Yeah, because we have a lot of community folks who want to come and support, and it's really frustrating that we can't tell them when.
Yeah.
And
They need more than a 4-hour window.
yeah, and they need more than a 1-week notice. So just for future kind of planning, like we have a lot of people who really want to come and support this, and I feel like we're not gonna capitalize on their enthusiasm and input.
So we'll get the working agenda, and there's 2 parts really. There's the presentation, but there's also public comment.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they'll probably be separated from each other.
And do you have a sense of what time is allocated for the presentation? And then and we are doing invited public comment, and then people will do public testimony?
Right, and Shandine is, unless there's someone that you know about, Shandine's been in charge of the actual presentation part, who's going to be involved in that from the public, and then anyone else would come during public comment. So if there's anyone
Okay,
else...
I'd love an update on who that is. 'Cause-
Okay. And she's home with 103 fever,
Oh,
she'd be
gosh.
here.
Sorry.
So we'll have to just
Okay,
talk
let's just...
offline
yeah.
about that. Thank you, Seth.
Great.
So one thing I do want to note is with regard to the presentation, one of our goals, as Nicole referenced, is to have more than just OEIB or Equity Committee staff present. So one group we've reached out to is Community College and Workforce Development, and in particular, one of their staff members, who's actually a GED product herself and now works at CCWD, Teresa Alonso, is probably going to be presenting that with Shandine. I think that's really critical to show that systemically we need to take some ownership of the issue and some of the ODE and CCWD differences between the two need to be fixed. That's one of our recommendations. And I also want to note that there's now a statewide GED conference planned October 24th, 2014. I think I sent the invite out to Nicole, but if not, I can send it out to the committee. But Teresa is convening that. It's a first ever. Lots of different folks are being invited. The more folks that come, the better, who may not be in the typical channels of communication. There's an opportunity for more information. And
Yeah.
so I just want to note her initiative at convening that group. And that
Where's that going to be?
It's in Portland
Okay.
at the Airport Sheraton.
Okay.
But I'll get that out to folks.
That'd be great.
So anyway, the plan is something similar to the presentation that Shandine did with the Joint Committee. Don't know if there was feedback to her about, and I didn't see the final version, but we worked on the draft, which so not as much words and more images that you talk. The theory is that folks forget the words up on the screen, but an image is going to be very clearly remembered in perpetuity. And so that's the plan, is to do something like that with a couple different folks talking from those images. And what I understand from Nicole is that during the report where you presented the draft version of this, you heard a lot of positives. I think one big question that came up yesterday from the outcomes and investments discussion on this topic was folks thought it was great. It immediately addressed things that were of import right now, kids right now who need that help. But there was a perception that it was really expensive. And we're trying not to talk too much about dollars as we talk about these
But what
investment
part do they
things
think
yet.
is expensive?
I don't know, and I didn't interrupt at that point because we're trying not to get into a dollar thing yet. More about
Right,
is it a
'cause
good idea?
Even if we did all three aspects of it, even the funding a kind of a pilot initiative to create models that work between community-based organizations and community colleges. I mean, that could be as cheap as $1 million or $2 million
Right.
at the smallest scale. I mean,
Yeah.
that doesn't even equate to a rounding error
Right.
in our budget.
Right.
Like,
And I know, Peter, that we get sold on looking at Oregon models, but if California's been already, engaged in this process, and isn't Washington too?
Lots of, yeah.
Yeah, it just seems to me that that's not the major part. We're not looking to them to bring something, but to at least hear of some of what they went through. I know we used that when we were doing the next generation science standards. I keep referring to that. But we had a sit down between the school board members from California, Oregon, and Washington, and talked about common issues, getting the political mobilization to do things, and they're about 2 years ahead of us, is what my understanding is, and it might be really useful to hear from some other states about what they've gone through, not just in terms of policy, but how they have opened this up to conversations and discussions across communities and whatnot. And, as we said at the beginning of this, and I know sometimes you shouldn't repeat things, but I'm going to repeat this, and that is that this issue has a disparate impact on communities of color and from poverty. There are few educational pieces that are as vital to our communities as what happens with a GED or with high school equivalents.
So at the board meeting, very much encouraged to make that same point as we have the discussion around it. I think this, in some people's eyes, was a smaller issue or more contained fringe, or I'm not sure exactly what, and it's clearly right in the center for so many students in
Yeah.
Oregon right now, ages 18 to or 16
Yeah.
to 25, the number, so.
That's great feedback because that's interesting. 1 out of 4 Oregonian kids are not completing high school and they're just not.
Yeah, there's no other
There's
path.
just, when we talk about 40-40-20, it's 1 out of 4 kids that are not. So it's sort of interesting that folks continue to have that perception. So that's helpful as we think about our presentation to say that 800 times because it's an equity issue, but it's also just a basic math issue
Yep.
of reaching 40-40-20. All of the good work.
We won't
and
get there.
all the transformational work we're doing right now is going to take a few years to stick. And what are we going to do with every graduating class that's happening, last year, the year before, this year, and next year that we know 1 out of 4 is not going to finish a diploma. So let's just be thoughtful about.
Okay.
I think that feedback about how people are seeing it and experiencing it is so helpful because we can hopefully think about a different, better message because everyone nods their head at the meeting, but we're not apparently articulating it in
Some are, some aren't. I just
Yeah.
think it, sometimes different voices
different.
too.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Okay. And
One-
I hope that we get folks who, are part of our invited testimony, and then I'm encouraging folks to come and just give their own testimony. I'm inviting some folks to, I hope you saw Andrew Mason's letter
Yep.
of endorsement.
Absolutely.
And so I'm soliciting, I hope other committees will, I'd love to show up with many letters of support on that day so that folks know what broad-based support there is that exists for this work.
Okay, so we good to go?
Yep.
All right, then we'll talk specifics about the agenda. I'm very excited about it. It's going to be a good agenda item, rich discussion and a good result. Okay, so our final, and we're good, we've got an hour and a half. We have public testimony, so maybe an hour or a little bit over an hour. Is that okay? Just move on to the next?
Yes. We don't have an hour and a half, though. We have 45 minutes.
Oh.
We're set to be done at 10:30, and it's 9:33.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, wow. My glasses going up and down. It look like 9. Getting old.
Sorry to be a little timekeeper, but
No, it's fine. So where you folks last left off was the meeting I didn't attend, where you were in a joint meeting with the Outcomes and Investments Subcommittee, and you heard a presentation about a subset of the investments. I think we started with the ODE and early learning investments. We did not get to higher ed, and then there's a total of 30 different investments that are on the matrix that you have, which we will be referring to in a little while. And in addition, as the Outcomes and Investments Committee has met 2 more times since they met with you, there's been a lot of work in terms of eliminating some of these off the table, raising some of them up as being recommended, and there have been some additional investments that have been recommended. And where it stands right now is we are preparing to present to the whole OEIB board next week. And in that presentation, part of what has been clear is that pretty much none of these proposals are ready to be funded. They're all still in different places in terms of their evolution, which is fine. And I want to remind everyone involved in this that we are doing something that I know I haven't been up in state government, so I'm relying on the testimony of others, but we're doing something that the education system has never done, which is 9 months before the end of the budget, we're trying to conceptually lay out some clear sets of outcomes and aligned priorities that are thoughtfully constructed before we start talking about individual pieces of money and exactly what the funding formula is and exactly what all the different agencies are going to be grabbing for at the end. And that's notable, I think, in telling a story, and in particular, the transition points, and you'll see in a second, but the way that the Outcomes Investment Committee is asking we organize this is around key transitions in the system, early learning to K-12, K-12 to higher ed, and for everybody in the system out to life and career. And it's a unique way of thinking about the budget because, as Dr. Henry knows, the state board and the K-12 system tends to look at K-12 issues. Early learning tends to look at early learning issues, same with higher ed, same with folks who advocate for career. And that in the past has led to lack of alignment, lack of a strong similar voice on certain topics around equity, for instance. And when you talk with many voices and you're working with a group that has a limited amount of bandwidth and time, you don't necessarily make the same case. So while none of these proposals are totally ready yet, that's not a bad thing. They've been grouped in a way that I'm going to show you that I think, and the subcommittee thinks is powerful. I think we might have some input on the groupings, but I think most importantly, we're still right in the right place as an equity committee to be looking at some of these leading proposals and helping to make them better with our best thinking and direction that we get from this group about how to improve them. Whether they come from early learning or ODE or anywhere, they can be improved. And what you have in front of you right now is an equity analysis that's done by our staff, and it's based on the training of our staff at OEIB and the equity lens is a way to look at these. And we're going to dive into some of these in some detail today. And maybe some that you've actually already talked about, like response to intervention, the third grade one, that is likely to be a large intervention, so I think we need to talk about it more. And my goal in this is to introduce some information for you and then to give a little bit of what our equity analysis is and then just listen to more ideas and more thoughts folks have about how these can be improved. So that's a little bit of background, and what I want to do is show you on the screen where we left off with the the Outcomes Committee and what the board is going to be seeing in a couple of days. So what we looked at yesterday what we looked at 2 weeks ago was these proposals, these 30 different proposals as a staff. We analyzed and recommended a group that scored highly on alignment. And we can go back, but I just want to give you a teeny bit of context and get to the key slide. Then a group that scored highly on equity. None of these are done. A lot of work on a number of them. You see a bunch of early learning there. There's just, third grade reading. All this has work to do. But these ones notably met a number of the standards. And then
the high school equivalency did not rate high on retain
it did not in the first analysis.
by the staff.
By staff, which I facilitated and didn't vote. But it's on the final recommendation. So then there was the highest rated proposals for leverage. Actually, wait, let me make sure that that's not, yep, that's true. So then we did some further analysis, which showed some of the scores for the different ones here, and then presented at the end 2 weeks ago the leading proposals grouped into 6 boxes. And these 6 boxes were ready for kindergarten, high school completion, something called system supports, third grade reading, college and university completion, and then something about CTE. And there were a number of problems with this first grouping that the committee identified. There's too many groups. There's nothing in workforce at all. In some of them, there's just 1 or 2 things. This doesn't look like something you can really present as a powerful message. It looks too much like a laundry list.
And again, high school equivalency is not.
Well, this is the same list.
Yeah.
Now, yesterday, this is what we presented to the outcomes and investments, and this is what we're going to spend pretty much all of our time either referring to this or to the matrix. This was based on a great deal of work after the first outcomes meeting to go back and do some reanalysis, do some research into impact and return on investment, and add some specific things to the list. And high school equivalency does appear under this thing called Prosperous Oregon, but it's also under post-secondary and high school completion. It's just things are not repeated, if at all possible. I noticed STEM hubs got repeated. That was an accident. But what I want to draw everyone's attention to is the first box is third grade reading with sort of a subtitle of Ready for Kindergarten. And the idea is third grade reading is a key place to align the system, but Ready for Kindergarten is the most important benchmark to that, and is something that the early learning, especially those early learning partners who are not educationally oriented, maybe healthcare oriented, are really, really focusing, not that they're not focused on reading, early language, language play, storytelling, all that, but they're really focused on that kindergarten sort of benchmark. So there's both of those there, and I'll just show you like how that might look if it was presented on paper. And this is not how it's going to be presented next week, but just an idea, a mock-up of how it might be presented. Third grade reading and Ready for Kindergarten, sharing the billing at the top. And then underneath it are all of the winning investment recommendations that lead to that. The very bottom one, expansion of school district collaboration, is in bold because it wasn't on the original list and it was added by staff. And we made the argument based on research that this particular intervention has been very, very successfully received across the state by staff, and it's also showing gains in terms of student growth. So just based on, that's
like
the
the
class project, and many people know about it, so that is in there as an addition. Except for that, all of the other bullets on there were sort of made the first cut, and those are going to be, when we're going to focus today, the ones that are on that list for early learning are the ones that we're going to want to look at. And I'll pull a couple in particular out, but the group's welcome to look at any of these. It's possible that at the board meeting, one of these could get argued off. I mean, you guys have the opportunity to do that in a couple of meetings as a whole board. So, but this is the universe from which they would come from. For post-secondary completion and high school completion, there's the list, and you'll see that there's a bunch more there in bold. And again, high school equivalency, just so we're not repeating, but is there as well. So we've added a number of things there. The STEM hubs we've added because they're the only collective impact strategy that we have focused around workforce and around getting better jobs for kids and math completion. And the barriers that math presents in graduation are huge. Getting through that, Algebra 2 is a big deal. There were a lot of concerns raised about STEM hubs, many of them from an equity perspective, so I'm actually hoping that we dive into that one today. And we've done some writing on that, but we want to talk about it. Some of these other ones here, like blended advising and dual credit, are coming from, actually, there's another slide that sort of says this a little bit better. These are the additions. And you see STEM hubs we've added because of collective impact and instructional and economic imperative. That basically has to do with math. It's the instructional imperative. And the economic imperative is jobs. The data is very, very clear that STEM jobs are higher paying. And if you take STEM out of all the workforce and look at a lot of the other entry-level jobs, they continue to be lower paying. So if we want students, all students, and especially students who are currently economically disadvantaged or come from families that are, to land jobs that are going to help pull them out of that situation, 2-year degrees in STEM, certificates in STEM, 4-year degrees, all those lead to better jobs. Anyway, blended advising and dual credit are going on at the Accelerated Learning Committee. They're really not something that we're asking to fund in addition, but it was important, we thought, to put them on the list because there's committees meeting to discuss that, and they line right up with the strategy that we have for completing college. So I just want to note there's all these additions. We added math instructional technology. This was something that one committee member brought up, and we've added it at least as a discussion point. The reason it says 10 through 14 is because there's this phenomena for students who go from high school to community college. They pass their high school math class, and this is something that Julia Brim-Edwards brought up at the full board meeting. They pass their high school class. A lot of them don't take math as a senior, but maybe they take math as a senior. They pass that. They go to community college and they take an entrance exam and they fail. A lot of reasons for it. A misalignment of curriculum is one reason. Kids not being prepped for the test, the testing conditions, all this. And then they get dropped into a non-credit bearing, non-degree track math class, developmental education. It also happens to some degree in writing, and actually to a high degree in writing. But a lot of the talk is at math, why that's happening. And then they're in developmental ed, and the statistics for students in developmental ed are terrible. They tend to not pass community college. So this math instructional technology really should say alignment and use of technology. So it's a proposed strategic investment to bring together those two systems to align the curriculum and to address a question like, if a student passes Common Core and they show competency, should they be taking a developmental ed test? Or should there be some counting of some kind of tests across the system? Because this is a place we create a barrier. And who is most affected by the barrier are students of color. And so we really have to examine that barrier. And there's a number of factors that generate that issue. So that's on there. The personal achievement record is a parallel process that I'm leading up with the legislature to build a longitudinal database. And probably folks have heard about that. The personal achievement record is something for students to have. It's not about the state having data. It's about students having data. It's meant to empower individuals to make better choices based on information about Oregon colleges, universities, private schools, certificates that they can get.
Peter, is this
and
the whole
jobs out
data
there.
system thing
Yes.
we promised when we launched
Yes.
the OEIB? Okay.
Yeah.
Just
It's the part of it that has to do with kids
Yeah.
and parents and personal empowerment. There's also the data collection part. High school equivalency you know about. Post-secondary talent development is where programs are set up. You probably have this at PSU. I'm sure you do. Programs are set up at universities to help develop connections between the post-secondary world and the careers that are available today, and connecting up instructors and groups with what's out in the work world to make that program for students more effective in terms of preparation. And that currently is the ETIC funding, is what most people know it as, but actually the proposal is to expand it. And then finally, career and technical education revitalization. We're not analyzing that, but that's going on out there. And that's something that there's a lot of data to show that students in high schools who get some career and technical education preparation are more prepared for careers. And cutbacks in programs like that at high school or community college often are based on budget because they're more expensive to run. But if they are in place, you get a broader distribution in terms of a lot of different factors in terms of student success. So that was a lot. I just want to now go back. I said we'd stay on the slide, so I'm not going to leave this slide. So the committee ended yesterday by saying we want to have three main concepts. And these are the three main concepts. And under these concepts, we want to advocate that the whole board look at these strategies within each concept and move that forward at the next couple of meetings with the full OEIB board. And so what I'd like to do is to ask the committee to, and you can really pick any one of these that is particularly of interest, is to give feedback on what needs to improve in terms of what's been presented to us so that they really do move towards equitable outcomes for all students.
Peter, can I, Madam Chair?
And there's so many, I'm happy to prompt on particular ones, but
In our last meeting, I did a advocacy for the ELL funding, which I see is connected to both the third grade reading, the Prosperous Oregon, as well as the post-secondary completion, because, well, three things. Demographics in the state of Oregon. I'll name it, the neglect that has gone on for speakers of language other than English, and the really important need that this establishes with communities who then support their kids going on in education. And so I'm making a plea again for the ELL funding formula change, because of both what that signals and because of how that can be critical to all of these areas. So I'll shut up.
so that will come before. I'm sure there's going to be some debate about, because it's money, and
Oh,
it's
yeah.
and it's going to move money, as we noted in here, as possible areas that might push back. It's going to move money from districts with lower ELL populations to districts with higher, and I think there's what's been expressed is there's an imperative to do exactly that. So I think that's going to be a great. So-
I really support Dr. Henry's comments. I think our ELL funding formula is one of our most important tactics to change overall education outcomes for the good in Oregon. So I support a lot of these. I'm very concerned with the STEM hubs. I am intimately knowledgeable about all of the partners who are part of each of those hubs, and I truly do not believe that the strategies outlined, I believe that if we are not careful and if we don't quickly take a pause and think about implementation and partnership, we will produce greater disparities than we already have today. I do believe that we should be funding and adding additional resources towards STEM. My concerns are purely on the implementation. And then the last one I would say, so I'm going to just point out the two I have concerns with, because
Great.
I actually generally support everything else, and I really like the repackaging and reorganizing. The other one is the quality early childcare proposal. And actually, since our retreat, I've actually had several people come and meet with me to try to advocate and explain it to me, and the more I learn, the more concerned I get. I have yet to hear a compelling argument about how that will improve outcomes for children of color. I think there is a fundamental disconnect between the theory of this and the market that exists for childcare in our community and how that impacts low-income people and communities of color. I just think there's an economic market-driven situation in our state, particularly in our rural and low-income communities, that is very different from the theoretical framework that this exists. And then I think there are some significant implementation issues that have already created significant evidence that this is creating disparities as we speak, as we sit here today.
So you're not saying it's not a good goal, it's being, the implementation is making a bad situation.
Of course, absolutely.
Yeah, I agree.
I completely agree, and am very passionate that creating quality child care situations is absolutely something we should focus on.
I know, but when the cost then goes up because I have a quality program, I can charge you more, and you can't pay.
Absolutely.
So, I mean,
And so
I agree.
as it has stood, all of the places who have been certified are historically places, we have very few, if any, providers from communities of color because of the outreach that we've done, and almost every place has increased their prices and decreased the diversity of kids that are in those programs.
yeah, that's fine.
And
So are people who come to talk to you not recognizing that?
they're trying to talk me into the model as it stands and the implementation as it stands, as opposed to looking at many other models that have been implemented across the country who have the same goal of quality childcare, but very different implementation tactics. And so if you're trying to sell me the product that we're doing, the way we're doing it today, I will say no thank you. It's not just a maintenance of a bad status quo, it's an increase of disparate outcomes and disparities in our most vulnerable populations today. So,
Which I would include both the kids and the lower income families
Yeah.
that these kids come from. Yeah,
absolutely,
yeah, I
absolutely.
definitely agree.
So, I mean, I think that one, again, the goal of quality childcare, yes, I'm 1,000% there. The strategy we're proposing, and people seem to love the strategy they're doing, like people are fighting for it, like there's a,
So that, you're talking about the,
QRIS, right?
and the steps of,
yeah,
you can, a childcare worker can, provider can
yeah,
do the Portland State program in conjunction with Portland State, where they move up on a scale of,
yeah.
I don't
Well,
remember what it's
and I mean,
called.
even other places that have
She's
done
not talking
that.
about, though, that, I don't think, getting higher points for having a higher quality. She's talking about how that hits the ground and then becomes something that's
Right,
taken over by the affluent to have a better successful rate for their kids only, to the
And I would
detriment
say,
of.
in my limited experience, but knowledge of those two systems in development, I don't think that was thought of at all.
no, I think that's where I'm kind of like the, people's understanding of the market and how childcare actually plays out. Like that sounds wonderful in theory, but if you don't understand the economics of how childcare works in this state, if you're not a low-income parent out there seeking it, or what have you, it's a really different experience. And even the step model, the way other states have implemented it, they have gone, we basically were like, 5-star rating model, do that first. That's usually the last thing you do. You usually actually do extensive outreach and create a whole new network of providers and provide
Build,
lots of
yeah.
support and build a groundswell, and then you implement a 5-star rating. You don't, and we did the opposite. So
So we're not getting the groundswell.
we don't have the groundswell. We're yeah. So that's, I think I've said that a million times, but I would just say
Bears saying again.
Are there other states that you know that would be good for us to?
Yes, and I've briefly shared some of it with Megan. I
Okay.
mean, some of the other states who've done very well at this have actually created partnerships between universities, community colleges, and then kind of culturally specific organizations to actually, where I've seen it be the most successful is where they have looked at the K through 12 education system, identified students who are struggling, and then invested in creating culturally responsive, community-embedded, quality child care, but by going and working with the organizations who have relationships with the, has historically largely been women, but sometimes men, who are in the most and best position to formalize informal child care, to create a model and the supports that can increase the number of providers that are that families who have the most vulnerable kids would be most likely to trust putting their children, and really building that, as opposed to taking the current set of providers and giving them a set of stars. And so where they've done that in communities and then did a quality rating and helped them go through that, that has been very positive and created lots of situations where linguistic diversity is celebrated and enhanced, and just lots of really cool things have happened as a result of that in places like Montana and Minnesota and all over the country. We've done a very different version of it.
Yeah, I think the Minnesota one has been one of the ones that has really built that from the ground up and has been able to involve communities, at least that's what I've heard,
Yeah.
to involve communities in building that, and also not just focused on the more affluent, but
Yeah.
on the
Well, it's had wonderful outcomes for economic prosperity for the Eritrean, Somali, Native American, African American. So they've kind of done culturally specific building up of early childhood programs in those communities, which have significantly increased the number of children from those communities in early childhood programs. And then you have all these small businesses that are having great economic benefit, and then typically the person running them is a parent of young children as well. So it's had great And I just don't think we looked at any of those models. So,
So this is the role of the committee, and this is very specific feedback and information, and there'll be a couple of ways that this gets transmitted. Obviously, as staff members, I want to welcome Chief Education Officer Nancy Golden to the meeting. Obviously, as staff members, we take that information. We have someone here from early learning as well. But I think it's also critical that at the board meeting, the point is we're going to be looking at these and asking questions from folks about what additional questions you have. And in this one, it's not just a question, but it's actually a roadmap, which I think, to the extent that you can describe what you just said and the specific information, that's terrific.
okay.
think
And do you
that's
feel
what
like
we need.
so, I felt like not actually about the hubs, but about the quality early childhood. I've now said that at a full OEIB meeting, at an outcomes
Yep.
investment meeting, and now this one. And you think people need to hear it a fourth time? I'll do it. But, I feel a little bit like a broken record.
I don't think people necessarily make the connection, and that's one of the things that happens, in our meeting process. And I think saying it again does help that, and I'm planning to say the piece about the ELL funding.
Yeah. Okay.
Because I think as people hear it, then they make those cognitive connections and then go, okay, this affects that. This is why she's been talking about that, because it's really important. And that helps people with their priorities. That's my,
Okay.
for repeating myself like a broken record on what I think are some of the priorities.
Nicole, I think another important thing about that is people have been giving us input all along the way, but at the next meeting, we're going to say which of these concepts, strategies, are you really saying we want to really support, so that then when it goes to the governor's office to budget the plan. So it really is, at this point, it's all been input. At that point, it's like the board will decide if that's something to go forward or not. So I think it's a critical time to put that in the room.
And as someone who's heard you talk about it a couple of times, it's stronger because you've got more information. I just think
Yeah.
it is critical.
Okay.
I learned just about the states and about the order of events that I didn't realize. It makes perfect sense,
Yeah.
but
But
okay.
it is tricky though, because it's implementation issues. It's not, I absolutely support resources going to quality childcare. That
Yeah.
I think should be the highest priority. But where I get very hung up is the implementation that we've seen thus far and what is being proposed. And I don't feel like folks are listening. I feel like folks are just trying to, I think there's an opportunity to tweak it to make it a more successful proposal as opposed to
Yeah.
force people to agree to what they want to do. I mean, that's where it gets tricky.
Yesterday, and I was listening on the way up, so I'm up to
Good.
speed. But yesterday, there was another proposal where I think the feeling is that they know it's an important issue, quality daycare. They know, the other one was the ELL proposal. They know that's important. But they still feel there needs to be a group who maybe goes deeper. And like Peter said, we have to go deeper in all of these. But so it might be coming out of the OEIB in the first reading that people suggest, we know this is important, but the way, the concept, but the implementation, we need another group to go deeper
Okay.
around that. And then between now and when the governor's budget's accepted, it's not that you can't go deeper on the concepts, but I think what we have to do is get that out, get it sanctioned, and then OEIB has to take the responsibility to get a group together to do that.
That's helpful. Okay.
Thank you. So those were two that jumped out to the group, and we still have a little bit of time. And so if there's others, just take a look and reflect, and otherwise I might bring up a couple just to prompt.
Well, the
for
one
this
that you
committee.
had mentioned before, the high school equivalency piece,
Right.
again, is one that I think threads back. I mean, if we're going to do 40-40-20, we've really got to step up with high school equivalency. Whether it's the GED piece that we were previously talking about, or some of the other pieces, we put a lot of emphasis in community college, and taking community college courses at the high school level. I think that's a positive piece, and it fits part of the population. But quite frankly, we have to do high school better. And and that's got to be faced and got to be dealt with in a meaningful way.
The one that didn't come before the group when you met with outcomes that was on the schedule that I feel it's critical to talk about, if I could just insert one, are the two higher education proposals. Because the equity analysis is interesting on them. So first of all, with regard to affordability, the proposal before from the Higher Ed Coordinating Commission does not have race-based testing in order to change the opportunity grants that students get, because that's illegal. The federal money can't flow that way. So what the Higher Ed Coordinating Commission has done is a couple different things. One is they've moved the timeline to make it much more flexible, so there's not this barrier, this absolute date that if you miss it by a day, because that tends to disadvantage folks who are a little bit less used to this kind of absolute deadline system. But then it also focuses on funding the students who are most needy of the dollars. And if you followed the discussion at the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, the decision to do that is that's the best way that they can target those dollars to students who are most affected by the opportunity gap. So it's really a poverty, not a race, but there's no way to do race. So to some degree, it's a proxy.
I'll push back and say there are ways to do race. It takes more resources. Other schools and universities have done it all over the country. The suggestion that I made to Ben, which is actually not a new thing to Oregon, it's the way that we used to do the Underrepresented Minority Achievement Scholarship in the state, which when I worked for Oregon State University, I administered. And it happened during the time of many of the legal changes. The reason folks don't like it is that it actually gives more control to individual universities. And so the way that you can make decisions about advantaging and being aware of race and ethnicity is you can include a supplemental question that asks people to talk about the diversity and the unique things that they bring to create a different and more reflective campus of Oregon, which some people may self-select not to talk about race, but it gives many people an opportunity to do that. The challenge with that is you will probably have about 144,000 applications, and the capacity for a state office to then administer and read 144,000 applications is quite challenging. The way other states get around it is they essentially allocate a pool of funds to a university or a college and ask them to provide that capacity, which is how the Underrepresented Minority Achievement Scholarship was administered. So U of O got a certain number, OSU got a certain number, so on and so forth. There were some problems with U of O just trying to do athletic scholarships out of it, so there were some abuses that occurred. But for most of the universities, they did it very well, and it was the time where we had the greatest diversity and the most reflective student body populations.
That was the UMass?
Yeah, I think today, to be able to support it with the federal laws, you would definitely need to include poverty, first-time college. You'd have to create many different types of diversity, which would be great. You could then also think about Slavic students and other immigrant and refugee students in a broader way than the UMass did at that time. But HEC would have to give up a little bit of control, which is, I think, the boundary. But you would be able to much better reflect all of the diversity of Oregon that way, as opposed to just doing poverty. So I'll just... my concern is saying there's no way to do it, because there are ways to do it. We're making a choice to not do it that way.
And we don't have a HEC rep. I'm not sure if that came up at the meeting that I'm curious.
I shared that model with Ben. So,
Okay.
because I think he feels like he couldn't staff reading 144,000 applications, which I totally concur with that.
He's a fast reader.
He's a very good reader, I'm sure of it.
Okay.
But that is a strategy you could do it with. It also provides some guaranteed resources of student tuition to different community colleges and schools.
What I think Nicole is saying, certainly what I would like to say, is that even though we didn't get to the discussion there, we see that as a very critical piece of what we support from the Equity Committee, and in terms of being able to make a difference. And it's one thing to talk about the courses and taking a certain number of credits, which is all great. But if you don't think you can get from here to there, it's formidable. I had a friend and colleague who used to go out recruiting. This is 20 years ago. Used to go recruiting, and one of his favorite things with like ninth graders, he'd say, "How much you think college costs?" And this is 20 years ago, and they would say, "Oh, $50,000 a year." This was a state school too, so it wasn't. But they saw that whole cost piece as just this looming barrier that said to them in their family context, "You can't get there from here." And we've got to make some headway with respect to it. Both about knowing about what the costs are and being transparent about that, but also in trying to help with it.
And I think where I feel very passionate is when we stopped doing the UMass and immediately transitioned to doing financial need and first-time college attendance, we took a 90% drop in the racial diversity of the students.
When was that?
2003, I think, is when the UMass ended. And largely that was because of who high school counselors believed were college material and who they recruited to apply for the scholarship. We just essentially took a huge nosedive in the diversity of students. And we said, well, we'll hit people who are in poverty and first-time college students, so I'm sure it will be diverse. And the evidence did not pan out that that's who was being approached or ultimately awarded those resources. And the UMass dollars were what eventually became the Oregon need-based. So it's the same dollars. It's just has a different target, a different outcome. So
Peter, just in terms of our agenda here, were we talking more about, I'm looking at the chart here.
Yeah.
Were we talking more about the number 8 and number 9?
Yes.
Those are, okay, just trying to.
And I want to be clear, the process is nowhere near complete on any of these. And we did not get to these two at the last meeting with the
Right.
intent to get to them now. So this is critical information. Honestly, some information that I didn't have. So it's very helpful to have it. And again, raising it next week, there's nothing wrong with that. But this has been registered and will be something that we follow up on, at least to get more up to speed on what all the issues are. Because the charge to our research group is to look at these with an equity lens and relook to get them as good as possible. And we have some time to do that.
So Peter, 8,
yes.
I mean, number 9 is obviously.
Number 9 is affordability, and then we're going to talk about number 8 in a sec.
And that number 8 is productivity?
Correct. So any other thoughts about the affordability one? That's tremendous information. So the productivity one does have probably a stronger equity focus, or does have a stronger equity focus. Basically, this is really two parts to this. One is funding for, 3 parts, I guess. One's increased funding in order to allow universities to improve and community colleges to improve in terms of their output. It's a funding formula change that funds based on productivity, actual students getting completion rather than just being enrolled. And it's also a focus on underrepresented students, because the weights and the productivity measures are going to be based on the college and university's ability to succeed with those particular students as designated by race versus poverty. And so the thinking is, in order for these schools to adjust to the new model, they're going to need some strategic type investment so that they can get their heads around the different funding model. Just like if that happened for K-12, there'd be a lot of rethinking that would have to happen. And if you're going to get paid by students finishing, that implies you're going to be most likely putting dollars into getting students to finish versus maybe where you put dollars before. And so that's why there's an idea of extra money. The theory about paying for Completion is that we incent certain behaviors. Right now, we pay by enrollment, so what we incent is one behavior, and if we pay for completion, we incent a different behavior. And obviously, you probably can understand this, at the higher ed world, it's a really, really hot topic about how this is actually going to be done, how it's going to be measured. And for instance, what is productivity? If you have a student who enters in for one class, and that's their intent, is to take one class, do they count in the denominator? Imagine there's some fraction out there called productivity. Numerator is completion. What's the denominator? And they're working on that. They're looking at things like students who doing a survey as one way to do it, or looking at does a student attend for a whole year or a couple of semesters in a row, and then we'll consider them someone who's actually intending to complete. So the exact metric's not done yet. Maybe we'll hear more about it, in the coming weeks. I know it's a hot discussion, but so comments though on it as an equity tool is really the key focus for us.
I think it's an important discussion to have. I think we might find some new things out about the whole process, and also why people seek not looking for a specific job or a specific profession, but sometimes for different pieces of what they do. I have a very bad example of that. About 15 years ago, I decided I wanted to do study abroad programs. And so I enrolled at Mount Hood Community College in their travel and tourism program in order to be able to do some of what I wanted to do. I was aiming for Mexico. I did the 3-course basic sequence, and I was done. I had what I needed to then go back to my colleagues at PSU and some other places and say, okay, I want to do the Mexico Study Abroad program. That's a bad example, but a good example in terms of, what's the goal? What's the student enrolled in that and matriculate in that, and what is it for? We've kind of tried to squeeze all of higher education into a channel of this is what you get at the end, but people come with various purposes and they frequently accomplish their goal and they leave with various purposes. And I think what we're trying to incent is higher education participation, higher education completion of various kinds of programs, and the economic viability that's provided with respect to that. Not the simple kind of things like you've seen in some newspapers where they say, okay, engineering degrees yield this much and liberal arts degrees yield this much and teaching degrees yield this much, and so therefore we're not going to put any incentive in the teaching degrees and the liberal arts degrees. No more history majors and philosophy minors. It's all going to be mechanical engineering. And there's a tendency to kind of simplify that, and I understand trying to get your head around it, but I want us to be really careful that as we do this, we understand that we may not be able to see the target, but we do need people who know about Descartes and philosophy in our society, although we haven't attached jobs to it. Okay, I'm done with my liberal arts rant, I guess.
I'm just happy I get to type Descartes in the notes. So other thoughts about the productivity measure, because that's on point with what the proposal would incent.
I have much less amazing comments than Dr. Henry. I just want to make sure I understand it. Essentially, we're creating a formula to give community colleges and colleges additional resources to recruit and support more diverse students. We're not saying they have to graduate them. We're still figuring out the metrics on how that'll be measured. And we're comfortable just saying if we want to put additional responsibilities and expectations on them, they need more resources to figure out how to do this in the best way for them. Is that what it is?
Well, the increased resources is the last thing, the find new ways to support, to build new programs or counseling or whatever it might be. most of the money is really the same,
Okay.
but it's how it's allocated towards a completion model versus an attendance model, so that does have the
Okay.
effect that you referenced, and it's weighted towards incenting historically underrepresented
Okay.
students to complete. Those are the ones that'll get you the most return.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad I asked because I was like, I'm feeling like I'm not understanding, so.
You know, Peter, I just hate the term productivity. I know this might be small, but I asked a number of people, if you say higher ed completion, there's a lot of people who want to come, they want to be involved in that conversation. If you say productivity, it's like, are you talking about how productive the professor is, how many classes they teach? And I really think our language can limit participation. Now, I know that's a national trend, because I've talked to Ben about this, and I guess this word is a national trend, but, you know, I do think part of engaging our community is using language that engages them, so.
And your recommendation is just completion,
Yeah,
or?
completion, because you can still have a denominator, you know, and a denominator, and a, you know, you can still have the fraction, but I think it needs to say what you're really trying to get at, and it's not, it's really about graduation
I agree with
and
you.
completion.
I prefer completion to productivity. I appreciate a national trend, but I don't love that word.
No.
I don't know if I want to be in that national trend.
Other thoughts? I think these are terrific.
I mean, the only thing I would say is, I think the way it's explained here, not to make things longer, I mean, I really did not understand it until you re-explained
Got
it
it.
to me, so it may have been the name or,
Might be our colleagues as well that need a little
yeah.
filling in.
I'm not saying I'm the sharpest crayon in the box, but if I don't get it, then there may be others.
Okay, we can work on those summaries.
I think the other committee said, let's, you know, put them in the order of their, or whatever, and
Yeah, the new document, which I flashed up a quick picture of what we looked at yesterday, won't look like this. It's going to have a narrative. That's something that Nancy suggested as a much more readable thing. So you don't need to really look at this at all, but what you're going to see next week in this area is some narrative around these topics and how they flow together as part of a coherence. And I think then, you know, you'll see where it stands and what's strong and what's maybe not so strong about it. So,
This is assuming Peter never sleeps.
yeah,
he's been working unbelievably hard. I really appreciate
see
it.
that.
it's the greatest honor of my life to do this work, so it's a pleasure. Well, I think we're at time. So what I just want to invite the committee to continue to do is to dig in as an equity group, as
Okay.
someone who mingles with different folks involved in this work. As these ideas move forward, you know, more out there, is to keep on digging in. I find every single day there's another nuance to this, literally, as we look at this work on the equity front with regard to these investments, especially on the unintended consequences part. So I don't think there's ever going to be a time where the good idea isn't something that we can incorporate. So
Okay, great.
we actually don't have public comment, so
Oh, we actually.
no one signed up, but did you want a public comment?
Yes, I've heard some things I would.
Great.
If you didn't have them, I would,
You bet. I think Seth, just for the record, would like you to fill this out, and then... Right?
Yes. Are you ready for me to go?
It's Nicole.
Yes, please.
I'm Dave Porter. I'm an international education advocate, and I've already submitted some stuff to you on the dual language immersion. And I would say I want to speak in support of the dual language assessment tool, and I want to speak in support of the ELL funding formula change. But I'll have to say that's missing the funding for Spanish dual language immersion programs. And it's missing, if we were to try to expand dual language immersion programs, we would bump into the big problem of we just don't have the teachers to do that. We do not have any in Oregon supply of any significant number of Spanish dual language immersion teachers. So you need a systemically deal with that with the Schools of Education and the Teacher Standard and Practices Commission. It's even a larger systemic problem in that it's difficult. There are ways to bring international teachers in, you know, like from Mexico or California, if you can, or another state. But it's really awkward and it's really temporary and it's probably not very enticing to bring a student in here. So I know Portland Public Schools, they started yesterday. I saw the Human Resources Director last night at a board retreat. They haven't filled all their Spanish dual language. All the full-time ones are full, but they've got some part-time ones that are not full. So I'm encouraged. I think if Nancy Golden has a committee that pursues this ELL funding, maybe they can look at, the funding's just not going to solve the problem, not for the Hispanics, and it's probably not for the students of other languages. There's other systemic changes that need to take place. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that. I think that concludes our meeting. Thank you, everyone, for a
Okay.
great discussion.
So we're clear, we're not having an October,
We'll have
We will
November.
not have an
Okay.
October meeting, we will have a November meeting.
okay.
And thank you, Peter, for working so hard on not just our work, but many other facets of our work.
Okay.